What is going on, Sports Wars? We're here, we're live, and we're back for Against the Spread on Wednesday nights. We had some scheduling stuff. We had some big stuff going on last week, so we weren't able to stream, but we're back for Week 5 previews for college and NFL. Robert Barnes from sportspicks.locals.com. How you doing tonight, my friend?
Doing good. As always at Sports Picks, gonna have some fun picks up for this weekend for all the big games on European football, American football, college football, pro football, you name it. I'll probably have some political bets up as well. And for all those that are new, Sports Picks last year had big 5% winners on the college football championship and the Super Bowl and the NBA Finals and the college basketball national championship and the World Cup and the Champions League. And we went 6-0 and won all 6. Won big bets on the Super Bowl in back-to-back years, in fact. So we'll see if we're able to keep that up. But you can get all of that for the best price in all of sports handicapping, or just join up and get the free picks if you want from a range of our members who are good. Cricket, Cody, a bunch of other folks that add their value. We got some folks that know rugby and that know the difference between Australian rugby and other rugby. They got their picks up for the Rugby World Cup. All of that available at sportspicks.locals.com.
If there's a game with a winner or a loser, you can probably find somebody betting on it somewhere. So good to know. Good to know. We'll plug that one more time before the end. If you're interested, the link is in the description. But listen, we weren't here to give our picks for what happened last week, but we did have one pretty bad beat. I think it might be the worst beat, at least in the NFL, of the week. And that involved the Sunday night football game between the Jets and the Chiefs. You know, Chiefs were 7-point, 8-point, 7.5-point favorites in that game, and they had the ball. The refs helping out a lot, it seemed, to some people down the stretch of that game. And Patrick Mahomes breaks off a quarterback scramble with the game on the line. And instead of waltzing into the end zone, making it a 10-point game, he slides down at the 1-yard line, and the Chiefs go on to win by 3. So many people had to be furious about that one.
Yeah, the public was really heavy on the Chiefs last week. I was happy with that because I had the Jets. So if for all those people who bet the Chiefs, they should ask themselves, why are they betting on a team that's Taylor Swift's new favorite team? So you bet on the Chiefs. You're banking that the Taylor Swift curse goes away. It's not likely to go away anytime soon.
Well, to be fair, it helped out against the Bears the first week. So, but that is the Bears.
But it's the Bear. The Bear who blew, what was it, a 21-point lead, 25-point lead in like the fourth quarter?
I think it was a 21-point lead, if I remember, yeah.
It's unbelievable. The Broncos still don't have a defense. I mean, any doubt about that was answered when the Bears, they made Justin Fields. He had he didn't have a legitimate incompletion beyond a Hail Mary until like the fourth quarter. That's how bad the Broncos defense is. It's amazing how it's just collapsed in a single season. But it's been an interesting week. And then the Jags get to play back-to-back games in London, of all places. Maybe that's because the owner is thinking about moving them there.
You know, that rumor's been around for forever. And obviously, I think doesn't he own Wembley or something like that? Or at least he owns some big stadium in London that they could do it at. The logistics would be so difficult to just have one team in Europe. I think if at any point we do get a big NFL expansion, there's a chance that you just add a European division. And you have, because obviously it's kind of big in Germany and stuff as well. They do games in Germany. So if you could add, 4 teams in European countries, one in the UK, maybe 2 in the UK, 1 in Germany, 1 in Italy or some shit, who knows? But I think then you can make it a little bit more reasonable in terms of so many teams having to travel and stuff like that. But right now, to just add one team, I think it would just be such a big disadvantage. Not that the Jags have had the best home field advantage over the last, decade plus anyway, but now they actually are having a team around them, an exciting team to watch at times. They've got some weapons around Trevor Lawrence, so fans are definitely coming out a little more to support them. There's no doubt about that. In terms of Chicago Bears, yes, the Denver Broncos defense is so bad that they actually made Justin Fields look like a pedestrian NFL quarterback for a while. To be fair, a lot of those throws I probably could have made that are so wide open. But Justin Fields, thankfully, because at this point, I'm just hoping for the Bears to not win a single game and get the number 1 draft pick. I think they made a mistake by hanging on to Justin Fields. I said that all off season long. I've never had any faith in this guy. I'd much rather have been starting off again fresh with a year one contract with a different Ohio State quarterback, CJ Stroud, who is looking great. Let's just be real. He's looking great for a Houston Texans team. There were not a lot of expectations for that team. And CJ Stroud is averaging 300 yards per game. Justin Fields, I think, has 2 300-yard games in his 3-year NFL career.
Yeah, they're not the same. And we'll see if Joe, I mean, this is the second year in a row that Joe Burrow has started off horrible. People forget last year they had the worst offense in the league through 4 games, just like they do this year. So the question is this just another injury, lingering summer, not being really ready to play issues, or is there something systemic there? Similar, there's similar questions about New England. Maybe Mac Jones was a mistake for people to bet on, or needed to be in a different system or scheme to be able to succeed, as the Belichick magic appears to have disappeared. At least sure did in one of his worst losses ever last week against the Dallas Cowboys. So it's been an interesting start to the season. Some teams as expected, a few teams performing worse, and it still looks like the Raiders head coach belongs as an offensive coordinator, not a head coach in the NFL.
Yeah, when you got the owner chirping with fans, when they're demanding he fire Josh McDaniels, you got Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs chirping in the locker room about they're tired of losing, blah, blah, blah. Josh Jacobs, a guy who held out for a long time. He certainly doesn't look like himself. So I don't know if he really has too much room to be talking right now. Personally, when you decide to hold out and when you decide to not show up during training camp, and then when you get off to a slow start, maybe hold your tongue. That's kind of the way I feel about it. But yeah, definitely some chaos in that locker room.
And I thought Anthony Richardson would be a boom or bust, and more likely bust. I didn't predict that he'd be boom or bust within the same game. So like the down 23-0, another team that almost came back and won against the Rams at home. I think he had like 5 completions or some ridiculously low number through 3 quarters. And then he almost made a couple of big crazy plays and almost took him back and took him all the way to overtime with a chance to win the game. So we'll see how the Anthony Richardson experiment continues. I'm still a skeptic, but you got to see both sides of his potential in a single game.
Well, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the week before when he was out with an injury, didn't they win with Gardner Minshew?
They did.
Yeah, so this is a team that is not – it's not like it's a talentless team. They still do have a solid defense. Well, they gave up a lot to the Rams, but they've got playmakers on defense. Regardless whether Jonathan Taylor's in there or not, they seem to be able to run the ball. So obviously it helps when you got a threat like Anthony Richardson back there as well. Obviously is going to help when you have to account for a guy like that. But this isn't just a team that's going to roll over. But it looks like they got a player who there's good reason to be excited about with Anthony Richardson. He's more than just raw athleticism. I think we've seen that. And I mean, at this point in time, maybe the Panthers are wishing they had him on their team instead of Bryce Young. Now, Bryce Young might need a little more help around him to get to his potential, whereas Anthony Richardson's able to do some stuff in that kind of scheme. But
yeah, it'll be interesting to watch all these guys. Like Jordan Love, another example of a guy that's been kind of boom or bust. Are they going to be, like Trey Lance, end up, traded for a 4th-round pick when the year's over? Or are they going to be the next Jalen Hurts? And I think it's still open judgment, but I agree that at least as it relates to the Bears, it doesn't look like there's much promise to keep betting on Fields suddenly discovering a ceiling he hasn't got anywhere near.
Get that fucking bum out of here. Make him into turn him a fucking wideout or something. Who is the Ohio State quarterback? Terrell Pryor? Did he turn into a wide receiver or something?
Cardale Williams? Did he? There was a couple of players in there.
Cardale Jones.
I know you're talking about Pryor, right?
I feel like Terrell Pryor. I'm thinking the name's Terrell Pryor, but he was like
I think it was Terrell Pryor.
A solid wide receiver for years after he made the conversion. Just fucking call it with Justin Fields. That's how I feel about it. But Mike Hill for $5. Did you enjoy the first game ever from Andy's room? Yeah, they did. Disney went all in with an Andy's room type of thing. They had chips in the guy's pad so they could see their movements, and I guess trying to get kids more involved for a younger audience. It was unique. I don't think I want to watch a whole game of that, but it was unique what they did. So I guess you got to try something. They've done the Nickelodeon broadcast where they've got like characters and slime in the end zone and stuff. So
interesting. Yeah, just to try to
blame
build
them
up
for
support.
trying.
I mean, the Manning brothers are still fun to watch because, like on Monday night when it was once again the Giants being the Giants and Daniel Jones realizing there's another guy they probably shouldn't have extended just based on 1 year, throwing that bad pick six when they were close to scoring, and Peyton Manning was like, oh no,
Didn't have anything to say.
Yeah.
The criticism I have about that program still is the technology seems to be an issue. There seems to be a lot of delays, especially when they have guests on, and it seems to be a little bit awkward for them. Like, we're used to doing this, so we're used to live stream, we're used to ad lib, we're used to doing all this stuff. There's still even 2 years into the Manningcast. There seems to be some weird dead air at times. But
yeah, they're still watching and reacting. Like when it's at its best is when they're analyzing what's going to happen before and what should happen and what's strong and what's weak and that's when or they give quick analysis. Like they did a little bit with Daniel Jones when he threw that pick. They're like, oh, he saw this, he should have seen that. So that's when they're at their best. But that sometimes they just watch and react rather than give analysis.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, what can you say? Daniel Jones throws a pick six, and they just sat there.
Well,
Like,
and they want to be
this
like
isn't good.
polite and kind of courteous, and that's when they're best is when they're not trying to be polite and courteous. Just say that was a terrible play. He missed this. He did this wrong. He did that wrong. That's what works from a dramatizing purpose, rather than oh golly gee, wish you wouldn't have done that.
Golly, Will Ferrell. What do you think about Eli's Will Ferrell impression? And then like a 5-second delay. That stuff is dumb. I don't feel like we need all these random guests, especially people. I don't need to see Jon Stewart on there talking about the Giants, whatever. Fuck that. Yeah. Just let me have these guys hanging out. Bring Archie in there for a while. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we might as well do a little bit of a preview of these games. Let's start out with the college games, the college template. Obviously, that USC Colorado game last week ended up a lot closer than people expected after that hot start USC got off to. Real quick on that game, did you see that happening? We didn't get to talk about it last week, but that USC defense is a typical Lincoln Riley team, it seems. They still have not fixed that defense, and Colorado was able to come back.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Prime's really delivered. Other than the blowout disaster at Oregon, they've had 4 good games at home or on the road. I mean, they upset TCU on the road. Then they beat Nebraska soundly, an old rivalry of Colorado, beat their in-state rival in double overtime in Colorado State, and then take the big dogs of the Pac-12, USC, to the limit within a touchdown with a great second half comeback. That offense is very creative in that under Alex Grinch, that defense, he had 1 or 2 good years at Washington State. He's never had a good year since. Sometimes they do a good job creating turnovers, but that's it. He was terrible at Oklahoma. The defenses were never good, and they haven't been good at all at USC, and there's no reason to ever think they're going to be good. And, they had struggled the week before against, I think it was Arizona. Arizona State. Arizona State took them to the fourth quarter. It was Arizona State. I mean, this is a Arizona State team that lost at home to horrible Oklahoma State. Well, it got whooped by Fresno State at home. Barely beat some little directional school to start the season at home. And there they are playing in the fourth quarter against USC. And that's just the defense is just such a weak link. What stands out so far this year in college football is I don't see any dominant programs. You have the only one that really has an elite offense, and that's USC, and their defense is average at best. And then a lot of the really super talented teams have real question marks in their quarterback role at Alabama, at Ohio State, at Georgia. None of these offenses are exploding on anybody really. And even when they step down in competition. So I think if there was any year somebody could steal a national title, especially pre-playoff season, when we have 12 teams and it's going to be much harder for a team to run the table. Whereas now, somebody that could be like a TCU and win back-to-back, sneak in the playoffs and win back-to-back. This is the year it could happen, where a team that's not uber talented might steal a national title. But I think it'll be probably the last year it can happen.
Well, the defending champs certainly have not looked as sharp as they've looked the past few years. The Georgia Bulldogs, keep getting in these rough, messy games, and they might have a challenge on their hands at home against the 20th ranked Kentucky Wildcats team this week.
Yeah, Kentucky put the smack down on Florida, ran all over them. One running back, like 200-something yards on like 10 carries. Or some ridiculous yards per rush they had last week. They go into Georgia as 14.5-point dogs. Expected score, according to the bookmakers, 17 points for Kentucky, 31 for Georgia, reflecting that limitation of their offensive potential and respect for Mark Stoops' Kentucky defense that tends to step up in competition and perform well. The public likes the Wildcats, not trusting Georgia after what they saw last week, struggling against Auburn in their old rivalry game as Hugh Freeze gave them a bit of a scare, took it all the way to the fourth quarter where Bowers showed once again that he's probably the leading Heisman candidate. One-man band making one-hand catches to help the Dogs survive on the road. And Kentucky having that big blowout win against Florida after Florida had upset Tennessee. So my talent-wise, this should be Georgia by 3 touchdowns. But Kentucky has had a habit of playing Georgia close. You don't have an explosive Georgia offense at all yet this year. You don't have a dominating running game. You don't have a suffocating defense. Now, Kentucky with Leary is very much a ball control kind of offense. I don't think they're going to be breaking off 100-yard, 80-yard, 60-yard runs like they did against Florida, against Georgia. That Georgia has always done well. Defend the run, and Georgia's probably their weak link this season is against the pass, and it's not clear Leary can exploit that, even though Kentucky has some truly talented wide receivers. It's just such a conservative offense. It's fascinating watching Leary go from NC State to Kentucky, and he's the same guy. It really wasn't just the offensive scheme there in Raleigh. It's very much what Leary does well is throw short and intermediate passes. So we'll see if they're able to exploit some vulnerabilities in Georgia's defense. But the public thinks Kentucky's a live dog. Now, of course, that's usually the curse of death for an underdog to be a public underdog. They don't cover at a very good rate at all. I would lean Georgia in the game just because I don't think Kentucky can exploit Georgia's one weakness. And I think Kentucky's defense is actually slightly down this year. Just Florida wasn't able to successfully exploit it.
Yeah, I think it's understandable for the public to be wary. Out of their 5-0, but their only 2 real games have both been challenging. Auburn and South Carolina, both in question late in the game. So this is really a big matchup for Georgia to show everybody that they still deserve that, number 1 ranking, that they deserve to represent, they are the defending champs. It's time to actually show it despite all the talent they lost. So it should be a good matchup. Another SEC matchup that, I think people thought probably before the season that this would be a bigger matchup than it is now, at least in terms of where they'd be ranked. But you've got Alabama coming off, a couple good bounce back wins for sure after they look like absolute crap early in the season. They are heading to play Jimbo Fisher in Texas A&M.
And the last time they traveled to Aggie Land pulled the upset. And the first time an assistant defeated Nick Saban, before now, several assistants have defeated Nick Saban. And the question is Alabama on the decline? Its recruiting rankings say no, but its performance on the field this year has flashed yes. Now, they did very well against Ole Miss, did very well against Mississippi State, but struggled early in the year against creative offensive coaching in Sarkisian's Texas at home. And now they face Bobby Petrino's offensive coaching on the road, where it doesn't matter whether it's Connor Wegman or the backup. Both of them are putting up solid numbers, as A&M did again last week against Arkansas. And A&M seems to have stabilized that defense, though there's people have skepticism about DJ Durkin's defensive coordination and calls. But the weak link in A&M that was exploited by Miami were big plays offensively, and Alabama hasn't shown the ability to consistently do that with Milroe at quarterback. They can run the ball, they can stabilize the run, they can make a few big plays down the field, but not with consistency. The defense has really stabilized. The expectation in this game is a 24-22 Alabama win. About 3/5 of the money's coming in, a little more than that on Alabama, But the sharps, the smart money, wise guys are on A&M because they don't trust Alabama, and because talent-wise, this is the most talented team Texas A&M has ever had from a recruiting ranking perspective. We'll see if it translates because it hasn't, that game at Miami, offense looked fine, but the defense got torched all game. Now, Miami has been doing that all year this year with new coordinators on both sides of the ball. May do it again this week to Georgia Tech and managed to lose at home to Bowling Green somehow. But I think calling it a close, conservative, low-scoring game, given Jimbo Fisher's nature, given the nature of these teams, given the fact that both defenses have played pretty well, given there's questions at quarterback, makes a lot of sense. I would lean that the A&M could pull the upset again, but there's a lot of people betting Alabama because it's very rare you get Alabama under a field goal in the last 15 years.
Yeah, a lot of questions for both these teams going forward. Certainly a lot of pressure on Jimbo Fisher with the recruiting classes that he's been able to bring in while he's been there. Definitely needs to start coming across on the field. We did have Eric Stratton with 5 gift memberships earlier. Thank you very much, Eric. And we got a question from Lily Ramsey for 2. How you feeling about the Ducks? Well, the Ducks
looking good. They were asleep a bit for that first half there against Stanford, then woke up and put up easy points against what is really, truly a bad Stanford team in the massive, turnover there. I mean, they lost to Sacramento State, that's where the coach came from the week or two before. So so I think, the Ducks are looking good, and, that's a good probably bridge to the big Pac-12 game of the week. Because it's, Washington State travels to Pasadena in the Rose Bowl to face the Bruins. And, you look at USC's defensive woes. If you're an Oregon fan, you're feeling pretty good that the Ducks can win the Pac-12, maybe sneak into that playoff. And in an open year where you've got teams with unusual vulnerabilities for such talent on their roster, this could be the year that Oregon finally does break through. So close several seasons in the past. But the Washington State team, a lot of people thought would be down. They went out and hired new coordinators on both sides of the ball, and they're a lot better than they were. I mean, they found a offensive system that is much better suited to the quarterback, and they've been putting up numbers on everybody. Upset Oregon State at home, upset Wisconsin at home, smacked the crap out of Colorado State to start the season on the road. But they go in as almost 4-point dogs. UCLA is expected to win about 31-28. Not as high scoring as you might expect. 3/4 of the money's coming in on Washington State and the Wazoo because the last game anybody remembers from UCLA is that debacle there in Salt Lake City, and Utah turned around and got smacked by Oregon State. And this is a Washington State team that's already beat Oregon State. So the old matchup game that some people play says the Wazoo should go in and win. Talent-wise, UCLA is more talented than this Washington State team. UCLA's defense actually played pretty well. They played well throughout that UCLA game. It was just they had a true freshman quarterback, 5-star, highly recruited NFL prospect. We got to see the former UCLA quarterback try to play quarterback in the pros last week for the Cleveland Browns. That looked ugly. Good. I had the over in that game, and I was like, what the heck? What's that guy doing out there? Whatever Deshaun Watson's problems are, he's not DTR in his first game. That did not look pretty against the Ravens of Ravens of all people. That was going to be guaranteed ugly, and it was. But I think UCLA, this talented quarterback at home against a lesser talented Washington State defense, I think that score should be a little bit higher than this is projected. And I get why UCLA is favored. I think UCLA should be a 3-point favorite. So I don't have any strong lean in the game that way. I think it should be an exciting, fun game. I think the UCLA freshman quarterback will bounce back, and I think Washington State will keep putting up big numbers like they have all year.
Yeah, when it comes back to that Oregon question, they're not playing this week, but they got a lot of teams to get through over the course of the next 4 or 5 weeks. They've got the Washington matchup next week. Then I think they play Washington State. Then I think Utah. Then they might have another off week, but then USC. So
and Oregon State's good this year with
exactly.
DJU.
So they've got a tough schedule. If all these teams stay around the same rankings, obviously they're going to some play each other at some point, but they got a chance to do big things this year, and they look like they're motivated as hell, especially with that win in Colorado. Now you got a lot of people rooting for them and against them now. Notre Dame, who I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm kind of getting messed up now, lost on that last second score by Ohio State. Great game. But they are looking to bounce back against Louisville, and that game is in Kentucky.
And, there's nothing that helps Notre Dame than playing an ACC school. I mean, they've pretty much owned them in football for the last several years now. They got a crazy spread record. They proved that again last week, down late to Duke on the road. And they had, I think, drive like 95, 98 yards with like 2 minutes left. And that's exactly what they did. And then they got the 2-point conversion for those of us that had the 5.5 point spread rather than the 4.5 point spread. So that was a nice little finish. So the Catholics have owned the ACC. Public expectation is similar here. Notre Dame's expected, according to the bookmakers, to win 30-24. A little bit lower than I expected because Louisville's been very good offensively this year, very shaky defensively this year. Boston College put up 28 against them. Notre Dame has been dominant most of the year defensively, but has flashed weaknesses here and there as Ohio State was able to move the ball, just not get points consistently in that game. I think they failed on a 1st and goal at one point early in the game. So if I have any lean in this game, I would say, the over seems mighty tempting. Notre Dame, 71% of the public's betting Notre Dame, but it's hard to short Notre Dame against a much lesser talented Louisville team in Brom's first season there. Against the style of offense that this Notre Dame defense has not struggled against historically. And only 6 points for a team that are 5.5, 6.5, depending on where you get it, that has owned the ACC. I mean, just ACC has not given Notre Dame trouble in the last half decade, at least not by the margin of the points. So I would probably lean that the Catholics keep rolling, and the Heisman campaign of that quarterback Sam Hartman continues.
This is gonna be the first time we've got like a 6th-year Heisman Trophy winner. That's a thing now with this COVID year. It's a legit thing that we can see happen now. But then probably I think what may end up being the best game of the week, or at least one of the most interesting matchups. We've got Oklahoma traveling to Texas, Big 12 matchup.
The Red River. Well, I can't say shootout anymore. Apparently, it's not. It's not the Red River shootout. It's the Red
River Rivalry.
Yeah, rivalry. They were going with the alliteration. It wasn't political correctness there in Austin or there in Norman. It was solely bam, that's a shootout. That's how it should be called because that has the right Oklahoma-Texas imagery. So this matchup is back to being a high-caliber matchup. Both these teams come in undefeated. Both of them come in off some good performances. So Texas favored by 6 to 7 points. I think it'll probably end up being around 7 by kickoff. 33-27, the expected score. So there's respect for both teams' defenses. They don't think both teams are just going to light it up as it has been when Lincoln Riley was there in Norman. 60%, a little bit more. Public likes Texas. They're remembering that game against Alabama. Few people have seen Oklahoma play this year because they've been playing, Cincinnati and playing Iowa State and SMU, not teams that drew a lot of national eyeballs. And they mostly remember last season when Oklahoma when the wheels really fell off in this game last year. But they're playing a lot better this year. Defense a lot better, offense clicking. Hopefully they don't lose their quarterback again. And they're not as worried about that in Norman this year because the backup is considered more talented than the current starter. So I think this is going to live up to expectation. I think it's going to be a fun, exciting, old school Red Rivalry shootout. It's going to go down to the wire, and this is a big game for Texas. They win this one. There's nobody else really left on that schedule that should upset them before the Big 12 title game. Oklahoma wins it. Same story. Oklahoma State is down. A lot of the other Big 12 programs are down. Kansas State's a little shaky, very injury dependent. Kansas keeps having quarterback injury issues. It showed up and flashed last week. Baylor's not the same team, even though they had that incredible comeback from down almost 35-7, and they came back to actually win that game against Central Florida on the road. But Baylor's flashed major weaknesses. TCU lost at home to West Virginia. So it's not exactly a talent-riddled Big 12 this season. So this is the game that probably decides which one of these teams is in the playoff.
Yeah, Baylor has to be one of the most disappointing teams for a lot of people this year with all the hype they came in with, and they've just had some real bad performances. But you're right. Both these teams 5-0, both of them coming off solid victories. Oklahoma over Cincinnati and Iowa State. But then you've got Texas coming in and dominating Baylor and Kansas. Kansas with the quarterback issues. But still, very exciting for the Red River shootout. That'll be this weekend. Now let's shift gears a little bit to the NFL because we do have some NFL matchups. We talked about the London game, the Jags playing their 18th game in the last decade in London, it seems. But they're going against a Bills team who, after the Bills came out and kind of laid that egg against the Jets to start the season, they've been on fire, and they wanted to prove to everybody that the Miami Dolphins, people talked a little bit too much about them. They wanted to show they're still an offense worth thinking about as well. And they definitely did that last week. We'll see if it continues against the Jags.
Yeah, so I mean, the Jags, I think, have a slight edge here just from a situational perspective because they played in London last week. So they get to hang out in London and prepare all week in London, whereas Buffalo is coming off that big win against Miami, and they got to do the 6 hours across the pond. So we'll see if that has any impact for the early start game there for the Jags, whether that gives them just enough of an edge to be a little bit better. They've, as a whole, underachieved this year. I mean, at least offensively, people expected a step forward built off that last half of last season. That really, they showed parts of it against the Colts, but then since then have really kind of struggled. Lost to Houston at home, beat Atlanta in London last week, but it wasn't a very impressive offensive performance. So we'll see if they can do better against a Bills team that right now, after that demolishing of the Dolphins, people are seeing as the best team in the league. The Bills favored by 6, 27-21 is the expected score by the bookmakers total. Almost 90% of the bets are coming in on the Bills. So the public thinks Bills are just going to keep rocking and rolling. I would point out to folks when that happened about this point, or a little bit later than this point, but not far away from it last season, is when the wheels did come off in Buffalo and all of a sudden the struggles reappeared. So we'll see if Jacksonville really needs to get off the schneid offensively. We'll see if they use the opportunity to spend a whole week in London to do it. I wouldn't take the public favorite at this heavy a public favorite under this set of circumstances. My guess is it'll probably get up to Buffalo by a touchdown by kickoff.
Yeah, I think the Jets' loss to start the season combined with the way Miami started off so hot, I think that motivated the Bills a lot in that game. I think they're probably going to keep that going forward. That having that wake up call and that terrible performance from Josh Allen, I think it's better you have that in week 1 than in week 12 or 13. And it looks like they got some of those things sorted out. But the Jags, you're 100% right. With the weapons they have on offense, there's no reason they should be performing the way that they are. And they really got to pick that up. We've also got this team, Bill Belichick looks miserable on the sidelines. He kind of always looks miserable, but he looks miserable for a good reason now. So when you look miserable in your hooded sweatshirt with your cutoff sleeves and, Tom Brady's leading you to 13-3, okay, whatever. It's different when you're 1-3 with Mac Jones and you just benched him in the last game. But the Patriots are hosting the Saints, and this is a must win at this point for the Patriots, you have to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, their only win on the season against the Jets. And I think the big question mark that at least I had with New England was Mac Jones. And in this first season, he flashed potential. Second season really kind of regressed, but that was that weird having defensive coordinators pretend to be offensive coordinators season. They bring, I've never been a big Bill O'Brien fan, but he's still better than what they had last year. So this season was a chance to see who's the real Mac Jones. Is he a backup in the NFL or is he a high caliber starter? And because we saw with Tua, different coaching change, different quarterback. And in many respects, Mac Jones' performance stats were better at Alabama than Tua's were. Now he had a heck of a receiving core. And then the other question was always Belichick. Betting on Belichick in a range of circumstances has been profitable for as long as he's been in New England. But through most of that reign, Tom Brady was there as his quarterback. And, how would Belichick perform in the post-Brady era? And so far, it's underwhelming. And this year, it's not been the same. The wheels completely came off against Dallas. They had a little bit of bad luck against both Miami and Philly at home early in the year. They really outplayed Philly. And then in the Miami game, close call at the end, and maybe they get back into that game. So, but the bigger concern I would have if you're a Pats fan is Mac Jones is just not showing the capacity to be an NFL starter on any consistent basis. The big statistical question mark coming out of college was his receivers were so dominant that when he could go to his first read, he had a ridiculous passer rating. When he couldn't go to his first read, he had a terrible passer rating. And in the NFL, you don't get to go to your first read like you do when you're at Alabama playing with 4 NFL wideouts. And it's starting to show up when he's taken too long to make decisions, taking too many hits, taking too many sacks, making some risky throws in key situations that has cost them repeatedly already this season. So that's really and then on the flip side, you got a similar quarterback question for New Orleans. Did Derek Carr leave Vegas because he just couldn't get along with certain people there in Vegas? Or can he just not play under pressure? And when the Saints can't pass protect, even with elite wide receivers, he just can't score points. So, and how hurt is he? Because so far they have not played well at all offensively to start the season. They didn't write that big check to put up 15 points, 6 points, 9 points. And right now, the Red Rifleman for Andy Dalton looks better last season for New Orleans than Derek Carr does this year with the big fat contract. So this is a big game for both teams. New Orleans needs to get off the schneid. Derek Carr needs to prove that it was worthwhile. They wrote him the check, especially going up against Belichick's defense in New England. That wasn't their problem last week against the Pats, against the Cowboys. I think they only gave up like 5.6, 5.7 yards per play. They gave up two, not one, but 2 returns for touchdown. That was the problem in that game. So this is a big game for both teams. If New England has any chance to get back into the playoff hunt in that deep AFC East, they got to win this game at home. And if Derek Carr is going to prove himself worth the investment, he needs to get off the schneid. So New England's favored by 1, total of 40. Public is overwhelmingly on the Pats. They think the Pats bounce back, and they haven't seen anything from Derek Carr with this group of Saints to have any reason that the Saints will do any better than anyone else has against this Belichick defense. I mean, the Cowboys offensively underperformed Miami, underperformed Philly, underperformed against this New England defense. So if Derek Carr continues to show the same struggles, then Mac Jones might get the win that he needs to build some confidence there in New England. But personally, I have doubts he's ever going to be the guy. I think he really is. I think it's what I thought of Bryce Young when I saw him play Alabama last year live in Austin. So this guy's a career NFL backup. He's just not a starter. Doesn't have that elite anticipation skill you need to be a pass-driven quarterback in the NFL. Mac Jones is as immobile as they come, pure statute back there. He clearly doesn't have the capacity to read and make quick enough decisions to really be a quality starter. Definitely not with that dubious wide receiving core in New England.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's a good match there. It doesn't seem like he has any of the capabilities or playmaking abilities or anything else that could, take that, what seems to be a little bit lackluster in terms of weapons for the Patriots and make them more than the sum of their parts. It just doesn't look like that's ever going to work. It doesn't look like he's ever going to get better than we saw his rookie year, which wasn't that impressive, but at least they're able to cover for some of the mistakes, especially now they got injuries on defense as well they have to deal with. So looks like the wheels might be falling apart in New England for Bill Belichick. And when it comes to Derek Carr, those AC joint sprains, those can be tough to deal with and painful. So that's going to linger the rest of the season. It just is.
When you think about it, there's very few playing or coaching legends that go out on top. They usually overextend their stay and go out on a down. I mean, even Tom Brady ultimately did that. His last year in Tampa was terrible.
I watched his last game against the Dallas Cowboys in Tampa when they just got the shit stomped out of him. A sad way to see him walk off the field. But
and you wonder,
maybe the way Belichick's going too.
Exactly, and maybe the same with Nick Saban in Alabama. Maybe some of these legends have just overextended their time just a little too far and haven't kept up with the times. Like you look at the revolution of offense in the NFL to the various versions of the Shanahan offense. It's really the Kubiak offense. It's misidentified as the Shanahan offense. But that is very run-driven. Like you're seeing teams that if they can't run the ball, all of a sudden they can't score consistently. And for the NFL for about 10 years, it didn't matter if you could run the ball. A lot of those Tom Brady teams, remember, like 3.2 yards per carry? There was no rushing there at all. It didn't matter. But now it does because so much of these offenses depend on that. But as all these offenses have revolutionized, it hasn't happened in New England. They haven't revolutionized their offense. And maybe some of these guys are just a little bit behind the times. And that's often what happens in your legends like Bobby Bowden or Phil Fulmer or Joe Paterno end up leaving on not on the happiest or best of terms. There's not a lot of Tom Osbornes in college or pro football. They get to leave on their own terms.
Yeah, and it's ironic because Belichick's the guy who's always cutting edge, always like trying to get the next advantage. They even had that wild special teams play, when they had the guy run in from the corner and time the snap up, something we've never seen before that, now people are going to do. But in terms of the offense, it certainly does look a little bit stale. But we did talk about the Cowboys there a little bit, and we got somebody in the chat who's a big Cowboys fan too. We've got Young Rip of 5'9" in the chat who's calling me gay. But as I pointed out in the chat, there's nothing gayer than rooting for the Cowboys. But that's what people are going to be doing this week as the Sunday night game, probably the game of the week. The Dallas Cowboys heading to San Francisco to see if they can take a chink out of the armor for that 49ers team.
And a rematch of last year's big playoff game, where a lot of hype for the Cowboys went into that game, and it all came off pretty quickly. So can Dak Prescott redeem himself, go into a San Francisco 49er team that has just been bulldozing people, really ever since they injected Purdy into the offensive lineup last year? That offense was putting up big stats. Nobody knew how legit it was because they faced so many weak defenses in that stretch, and then he got hurt early against the Eagles, so we didn't get to see what that looked like. But so far this year, it doesn't matter who's stepping in front of them. They're bulldozing them. And their defense is still the 49er defense. Cowboys flashed capability up and down, but like I said, last week's win a little bit overstated because of all the returns for touchdowns and New England's offensive ineptitude. So the 49ers are favored, but only by a field goal, expected to win 24-21. Over 80% of the bets are pointing on the 49ers. People are not believing the Cowboys are any better than they were last year when the 49ers put the smack down on them. So I agree. This is an old rivalry. Going back to you really go back to the 70s, but definitely since the 80s and the 90s. These are some of the great. It was either Dallas, San Francisco, or Dallas, Green Bay, or Dallas, New York. Those are some of the great big matchups in the playoffs. Here we got another big one. It will definitely be the game of the week. They expect a low-scoring, tough, conservative game. I think it might end up being a little more higher scoring than that is where I would lean if I had any lean. But I think San Francisco favored by 3 or 3.5 or 4 probably kind of makes sense. That seems they have proven themselves the better team over this stretch of the season.
They're great on both sides of the ball. They got so much talent and they've got the scheme to fit. It doesn't matter who's touching the ball in that offense, whether it's Kittle or Debo or CMC. And Brock Purdy's just got to keep that train rolling. And so far, no one's been able to prove they can stop this offense when Brock Purdy's at the helm, unless he, tears his UCL. That we might have a very different looking NFL if Brock Purdy doesn't go down with that injury in that Eagles game in the playoffs. But I get why the public's pouring in the money on San Francisco. When Dallas has wins over the Giants and the Jets, the Giants team just looks like absolute dog shit now to everybody. That kind of makes sense. I'm a little bit surprised they're not favored more. Even with all those bets coming in, doesn't look like Vegas wants to move that line too much. But I think that's going to has potential to be a great game. Speaking of the Eagles, an Eagles team that has not looked particularly impressive. It's tough to say that when a team's 4-0. But when you look at the quality of their wins, when you look at, how close some of these games are, they're not performing to the level that some people would have expected for this team that went to the Super Bowl last year. Well, now they're heading to LA to play the Rams, a Rams team who, they're only 2-2, but it feels like they've played a little bit better than that.
Yeah, despite the almost blowing that lead at Indianapolis last week, and I think Cooper Kupp is supposed to be back this week. I haven't seen confirmation of that yet. But at least that was the initial hope. But these young receivers have really stepped up, and Stafford is playing really good ball, even without a dominant running game. And the defense, despite some of their offseason losses, is really playing pretty solid. And Aaron Donald is still Aaron Donald. And even though he's on the backside of his career, keeps flashing that unique Aaron Donald capacity. So, the Eagles go in as expected to win 27-23, 4-point favorites or thereabouts. Money's evenly split. People are respecting what the Rams have done so far. And the Eagles have been kind of slipping by here and slipping by there. Not always the easiest wins, not always the most convincing wins. Probably they are by most luck stats, the luckiest team in the NFL so far this season. And, if it gets over 4, that's a big key number in the NFL since 5 is not a very common number. So that basically it ends up being you need the Eagles. If it's 4.5, you really need them to win by 6. And that doesn't happen a lot on the road against a quality quarterback. And Stafford's putting up real numbers and appears to be healthy enough, even though he got banged up last week. And that'll be something to watch in the injury report. So the 27-23 kind of makes sense from a certain perspective, but I would lean actually to the home dog with the Rams.
And, they've had that wide receiver team working really well despite Cooper Kupp being injured when it comes to the Rams. They did designate a return from IR. I don't know when that happens. I know he was eligible after 4 weeks. I don't know if they're planning to have him return this week or not, but that will just add another weapon to Matthew Stafford's arsenal there. Seemingly doesn't matter who the running back is for them, but they got a lot of guys at wide receiver they can throw the ball to. And yeah, the Eagles. Do you think when it comes to the tush push or the brotherly shove, as they're calling it now, do you think we see that outlawed in the NFL next year?
No, I think they like it. I mean, in college, they ended up embracing it rather than keeping the old rule that prohibited it. So I think they're unless it creates undue injury risk, my guess is that they keep it.
And see, that's the thing. You can't do that on defense. You're not allowed to physically do that on defense because of the injury risk associated with linemen and pushing somebody and like next up, things like that. So the idea that you are allowed to do it on the offensive side, people are saying that doesn't really make much sense. If you're doing one because of injuries, at least you got to allow them to push on the defensive side. I do think we see some sort of way that gets addressed, to be honest with you. But I don't know if they're going to ban it or not. But they got to do something just because it is such a dominant move. But they're the ones that do it best. They do it better than anybody else.
No doubt.
And then the Monday night game. This is a weird one, a primetime game between a 2-2 and a 1-3 team. We hope to see Jimmy G back. Maybe Aiden O'Connell, Purdue Boilermaker, maybe he makes his second start for the Raiders. But right now you got Jordan Love and the Packers heading to Vegas to play the Raiders.
What's incredible is it shows you what people think of the Raiders currently, that the Packers are 1-point favorites on the road, and almost 80% of the tickets are coming in on Green Bay. It's like, wow, that you don't see that every day. And I think it shows increasing this is a Packer team, Jordan Love, that has mostly struggled to throw the ball consistently, makes a few big plays here and there, but it's very sporadic. That kind of got demolished by the Lions. And granted, this is a Raiders team that, didn't look good until late second half against the Chargers last week. Managed to lose at home badly to a Steelers team that turned around and got smacked around by the Houston Texans. And so I get why people are deeply skeptical of this Raiders team. But if this head coach is going to keep his job, he absolutely needs to get off the schneid and win a game like this, particularly on a Monday night, playing at home against a weak Packer team. So in fact, my free bet of the week here is that the Las Vegas Raiders win this game straight up. They got to get it. It would help probably if Jimmy G was back, but Aiden O'Connell showed some potential last week. He wasn't that bad. But the Raiders defense is what's been really missing frequently. But I think that they get enough going. There's enough pride at stake. That's a big enough primetime game. And again, it's the Packers with Jordan Love, who really hasn't shown a lot this year to be worth a road favorite against pretty much anybody.
Yeah, rough way to start your NFL career, getting thrown in almost last minute, taken from third string up to starter for Aiden O'Connell, and going up against, Bosa and Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack had 6 sacks, obviously a lot to prove against his former Raiders team for good reason. With all that being said, they had a chance, you know what I mean? They weren't completely blown out or anything. So I think he looked respectable considering the position he was in the state of that team right now. But certainly you'd have to imagine Jimmy Garoppolo needs to be back and healthy. How many times have we said that in Jimmy Garoppolo's career? Jimmy Garoppolo needs to be back and healthy for them to I think have a chance in this game as well. But there you have it. That's our 5 big NFL games to look towards in this betting preview. Got anything else from the NFL season you're looking at, or from the NFL week that you're looking at, Robert?
Oh, just the free survivor pick of the week. We haven't used them yet. Is the Miami Dolphins to bounce back at home against, I think it's the New York Giants.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost like too easy. I like you'd think you'd want to use the Dolphins on a little bit better team, but that's going to be certainly, I think that's got to be the biggest spread of the week. I think it's probably 12 points or something at this point in time.
It's
The
actually still
Giants just
around
look
nine
dreadful.
and a half last I checked, I think. And just because people still keep expecting last year's Giants to show up.
Maybe they're there somewhere, but that all Daniel Jones deserves some criticism, undoubtedly. But when you look, especially in the second half of that game, that offensive line is dreadful.
Yeah.
They are
And who has he
miserable.
thrown the ball to? You look at the receivers, it's like who on this receiver list would you want to draft for your fantasy league, no matter which quarterback they were playing with? And without Saquon, I mean, maybe Barkley will be back this week. Without Barkley, they have no real skill. And they weren't that good last year offensively. They just defensively hung in games, and Jones quit making big mistakes. He's back to making big mistakes, and the defense isn't as dominant. So they're back to being a bad team like they've been most of the time under Daniel Jones. And that Miami team is going to be hurting off last week's loss, and probably nobody to take it out on than the New York Giants.
Yeah, I saw one highlight from last week, and it was literally they came with a 4-man rush, and every guy beat their man. And all four guys beat their blocker, and they're on Daniel Jones in a heartbeat. So he certainly deserves criticism. They should not have paid Daniel Jones what they paid him, 100%. But they got way more problems than just Daniel Jones to deal with on that Giants squad. No question about that. But that's going to do it for us this week. 5 games in college, 5 games in the NFL we're looking at. Robert, once again, if people want all of the bets for this week, not just for NFL and college, but for virtually every other sport imaginable, where do they go?
You can join up for free and get all kinds of free picks at sportspicks.locals.com, or you can subscribe and get all the picks for the price of 50 cents per pick. There's no better price value anywhere. We put out hundreds of picks every single month, put out over 50 picks a week during football season. And like I said, last year we won all of our big 5% plays on every single major sporting final event and have had success over multiple years in multiple sports. So come and join us at sportspicks.locals.com.
There you go. Thank you guys for hanging with us over here on YouTube and over on Rumble. We will be back next week, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday to talk about college and NFL betting. All right. Thank you, Robert Barnes from sportspicks.locals.com. We will talk to you guys next week.